One of the beauties of preaching in the summer is I get this fan right above me, and a big relief. Are you guys okay with your window closed back there? If you need water, if you need to cool down, feel free to do whatever you need. I'm just thankful there's shadows and sunshine and all sorts of good things out there today. It's been a long time since we've seen it. Probably since, more or less, we started the book of Daniel. Every Sunday has been cloudy and rainy. But some sunshine, hopefully, has been thrown in from the Lord as we look at, like Cindy said, some choices the people who have come before us have made. So if you can turn to the book of Daniel, we're going to be in chapter 6. And our kind of overriding theme all summer has been and will continue to be, in spite of present circumstances, what we see around us, your God is in control. Chapter 6 is going to be our last narrative in the book of Daniel. Then we get to go into dreams and visions and what God is intending to do. But today is our last story, our last narrative. And if you've been with us, maybe you remember chapter 1 has been about a diet and Daniel and his friends remaining faithful and God meeting with them and strengthening them. And then in chapter 2 has been Nebuchadnezzar's dream, the king. And Daniel receives wisdom from God to not just know the dream, but also to interpret it. Chapter 3, we kind of focus on Daniel's 3 friends, and they're faced with a choice. And they choose to be thrown into the fiery furnace rather than turn their back on God. And God shows up in the middle of the furnace and saves them. Chapter 4, the king is humbled. He goes insane. He's out with the wild animals. But he's restored, leading us to chapter 5 when there's a writing on the wall for the next king. And he is not humbled. And God pushes him low. And eventually he dies. And a new story, a new kingdom, a new chapter arises for Babylon as the Medes and Persians show up. Chapter 6 has got to be one of the most famous stories in all of the Bible. In fact, whether you're a church person or not, when you hear the name Daniel, you immediately think in the lion's den. It's become such a known story out there that I hope we don't lose a sense this morning, just because we know what the outcome is, to meet Daniel and to meet up with the God who saves. Daniel, chapter 6. The story most of us know is the Sunday school version. That's not the one we're going to get. We're going to get the full-blown, unedited version of Daniel in the lion's den. Verse 1. It pleased Darius to appoint 120 satraps to rule throughout the kingdom, with 3 administrators over them, one of whom was Daniel. The satraps were made accountable to them so that the king might not suffer loss. That's a really fancy way of saying complete reorganization. There's a new king in town. He's going to put his bureaucrats in. His guy's going to take over. He's going to divide up his kingdom the way he wants to, for one reason. The end of chapter 2 tells us, so that the king might not suffer loss. You know what that means? He's going to make governors, and another word for administrators is presidents. Governors and presidents all so the taxes can be paid, so that the king won't suffer losses. It's a massive IRS restructuring. But, thankfully, a bureaucracy like the IRS, there could never be a conspiracy or scandal happening around these guys, right? Well, Daniel is one of these top 3 presidents. And in verse 3, continues, now Daniel so distinguished himself among the administrators and the satraps by his exceptional qualities that the king planned to set him over the whole kingdom. At this, the administrators and the satraps tried to find grounds for charges against Daniel in his conduct of government affairs, but they were unable to do so. They could find no corruption in him because he was trustworthy, neither corrupt nor negligent. Daniel is in his 80s when this description is made of him. He's 80-something when people are trying to take him down. He's got 80 years of life that they can move through. And all of them, right down to his most bitter enemy, says, there's nothing. There's nothing here that we can use to take him down. He's in his 80s. He's serving. He's learning. He's excelling at his job. Here's one thing from Daniel for us. Stay positive whatever your age. Stay positive whatever your age. That word, excellent spirit, means that even though he was an old man, he had a positive, winsome, magnetic kind of life around him. Have you noticed as some people get older, they become grouchy older men, grouchy older women? It's true. When some people get older, we become cynical, we develop a sour attitude. But let me put this thought out to you. It doesn't have to be that way. This is the same Daniel in chapter 6 who's 80-something that we met in chapter 1 as a teenager. We've just seen this man's life, and you know what we can say? Daniel at 85 is the same Daniel at 18. He's positive. He's wise. He works hard. He's got a winsome attitude. People are attracted to him. And you know why he's that way when he's 80-something? Because he built that pattern in his life all the way through. He has built habits to train himself to be this kind of man. Your habits right now, whether you're a teenager, whether you're middle-aged, whether you're older, your habits in life right now will be the habits you carry into your next phase of life. Are you a person this morning who tends to gripe, complain, resist change, demand your way, criticize others? You can play that out, and you don't need to ponder for a long time when I ask the question, what kind of older man or older woman then will you become? But in the same way, when we build the habits in our life of thanksgiving, zealously passionate for Jesus, wonderfully giving thanks to God who blesses us, gracious towards others, compassionate towards others, generous towards others, you also don't need to struggle. When you get into your older years of life, you will be the one that the teenagers rush to when you're 80 because they love you. And they love your generous heart. And they love the youthful spirit that you've maintained. The habits we have right now will build to be the habits we carry into our older years of life. Set your direction before the Lord now. There's a lady, some of you may know, most of you won't know her name. When I first was a part of our church years ago, I was just a guy spending time with the teens, and so I didn't have a lot of time with other people within our church until Bernice Dutton came along. And Bernice Dutton was one of these magnetic, attractive personalities to me. And so Bernice went into the hospital, and it was obvious she didn't have all that much longer to live. And the youth pastor showed up because he liked Bernice. And I remember Bernice laying in her bed, talking with me. And she said it was right at the time we just set a vision for our church and we were kind of going in a new direction. And I remember her saying, Scott, the only thing I'm really sad about is that I'm at the point now in my health that all I can do is pray for you guys. And I can't be a part of reaching young families with children, because if I could, I'd be down there every day working and generously giving. I said, Bernice, your heart, your spirit is contagious, sister. And I'll never forget Bernice's aging to be a positive, gracious, compassionate woman. We have stories I could tell on and on of people like Bernice. And we have stories of people who are not like Bernice, that build other patterns in life. Daniel was a man in his 80s that everyone around him says, there's nothing about him that we can trap him for. Another one is, he shows integrity, whatever his job has been. Integrity means you're honest, you're trustworthy, even when nobody's looking. Does that describe us when we're working in our jobs? The last part of verse 4 says, Daniel was trustworthy and neither corrupt nor negligent. That means his co-workers on the job looked at Daniel and said, he's the straight arrow. He's the guy the boss never finds fault with. He's the guy that never messes with anything. He's the guy that can be trusted. He wasn't going to steal. He was diligent. He wasn't going to mess with the time clock. He was a hard worker. And so all of these conspirators decided Daniel had to be removed. So they put a tail on him. They screen his telephone calls, his emails. They look to see what sites he visits on the internet. They call NSA to come in. They try to dig up any garbage from the past. And it fails. Because Daniel at 85 has been the same Daniel at 18. He's been loving God and living faithfully behind him. Daniel also is a great example for those of you men and women who have been very successful at your jobs. Have you noticed? Whenever Daniel is mentioned, it's like he's being promoted. He's moving up. He's now going to be not just the third highest, he's now going to be the second highest. His job was not just something to put food on the table. It wasn't just something to occupy his days, 5 days a week, to occupy his time. Daniel saw his job like hopefully we can see our job as a platform to bear witness to God in all places at all times, that he could demonstrate his faith in God. When people look at you in your job, what do they say? Do they say, this is a good man, faithful, honest, hardworking, and he loves Jesus with all his heart? By the way, when that's the case, when you live for God, there's always going to be those who are out to get you, that they target you because your faithful and honesty only shows their lack of integrity. And like Daniel, if you decide to be honest, faithful, hardworking, diligent employee who honors God, God is going to honor and bless you, but others may not. And that's what happens to Daniel in verse 5. Finally, these men said, we will never find any basis for charges against this man Daniel unless it has something to do with the law of his God. This is what these guys come up with. This is their best shot. He loves God too much. He's one of those Jesus freaks. He's always praying. He's the one that stays after hours, after he doesn't have to be there to counsel a coworker, to share compassion with someone who's having a hard time. He's the one that carries a Bible in his briefcase. Daniel, he's the one that calls his wife every night on the road trip. He's that guy. He loves God way too much. So they're going to set the scene for the law of God to take on man's law, or the law of the Medes and the Persians. Verse 6. So the administrators and the satraps went as a group to the king and said, O King Darius, live forever. The royal administrators, prefects, satraps, advisors, and governors have all agreed that the king should issue an edict and enforce the decree that anyone who prays to any god or man during the next 30 days, except to you, O king, shall be thrown into the lion's den. Now, O king, issue the decree and put it in writing so that it cannot be altered, in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. So King Darius put the decree in writing. This is a great example of political manipulation, feeding ego, and thrown right into it is a lie, where all the bureaucrats come to the king and say, hey, everybody on your team wants this law. All the Republicans, all the Democrats, they all want it. Well, except there's one man who obviously had no idea about it, Daniel. They come with this broad, descriptive lie to the king. And I wonder, 30 days seems odd, doesn't it? King, you're going to be God for 30 days. You're going to pull a little Bruce Almighty for a month. Why is that? Why 30 days? I think it's because these guys had no interest in the king. They could care less about him. These guys had no interest in the kingdom, although they put that out there. The only thing they're interested in is 30 days should give us enough time to take Daniel down. And that's the only thing that this law is looking to do. There's no repeal, there's no variance, there's no exception, there's no amendments, there's no revisions. Once the king signs it into law, it's done. And so King Darius puts the decree in writing. And I picture anyone who's raised kids, you know the movie Aladdin, where the bad guy, Jafar, he's all powerful. And then Aladdin puts that thought in his mind, you're only powerful because the genie made you powerful. And Jafar says, that's right, I need to be a genie. And he becomes a genie, and everyone's all scared. And then Aladdin comes up, with the lamp, thank you, rubs it. And all of a sudden the genie is trapped. The most powerful creature in Aladdin's little cartoon universe is trapped. And we're about to see the exact same thing happens with Darius. Darius, you want to be a great king. You want to be more than any other king. You want to rule, have people pray to you. That's going to be the highest. And Darius says, that sounds great. And just like the genie in the bottle, he's about to be trapped by his own power, his own law. Verse 10. Now when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, what do you do if you learn that decree is published? Cindy kind of brought us there. What do you do? 30 days, temporary period of time. God, I'll pray in my heart for 30 days. You'll hear my prayers. What do you do? Do you write your legislators? How dare you make that law? Post it on Facebook. Complain to all your friends. What do you do when that kind of law comes? Now, when Daniel learned that the decree had been published, he went home to his upstairs room where the windows opened towards Jerusalem. 3 times a day he got down on his knees and prayed, giving thanks to his God, just as he had done before. You know what I love about this description of Daniel? This outrageous law comes through, and he doesn't freak out. He does what he had always done before. For the exiles for whom this book is written, who are trapped in Babylon, who have been suffering under the oppression of the Babylonian Empire and now the Persian Mede Empire, for the exiles, as they hear the story of Daniel, as they picture Daniel going up to his upper room, not to flaunt it in front of others, simply to live the way he has always been living, going up to his sacred space to pray. It's what he did yesterday. It's what he's going to do today and tomorrow. For these exiles, it's got to be this word of strength to them that Babylon, they can mess with my body. They can steal my breath, but they will not ever steal my heart. And to steal the exiles in their suffering with the story of Daniel, who goes up just like he has every day, even with the edict. Could Babylon steal their faith, their trust in God? We see it in the fiery furnace ordeal, and now it's coming for Daniel. And the question begins to run through their mind, and hopefully through our minds. Exactly whom should we fear? Exactly whom should we fear? Is it the all-powerful king, the all-powerful government, the systems of this world, death itself? Whom should we fear? And we hear it coming out of the New Testament in Luke chapter 12, Jesus saying, I tell you, my friends, don't be afraid of those who kill the body, and after that can do no more. If that's all they can do, you don't need to fear them. And Daniel has this quiet, resolute, confident faith. He's living to please the Lord, doing as he had always done before. And he takes a stand, and don't get me wrong. It is appropriate for Christians to take a stand, but not to freak out in that stand. To take a stand as we always have done before, to say, yes, marriage, of course, is between a man and a woman. Yes, an infant's life is precious, even in the womb. That we take a stand for things, but in our stance, it's not new. It's not flaunting it. It's just the life we've always lived. That all people are made in the image of God, and all are precious. That my heart belongs to Jesus. And that the church would say, you can mess with my body, but you can't mess ever with my heart, for it belongs to someone else. Verse 11. Then these men went as a group and found Daniel praying and asking God for help. So they went to the king and spoke to him about his royal decree. Did you not publish a decree that during the next 30 days anyone who prays to any god or man except to you, O king, would be thrown into the lion's den? And the king answered, the decree stands in accordance with the laws of the Medes and Persians, which cannot be repealed. And the bureaucrats catch the king in their nets. See, the king is favorable to Daniel. We saw that at the beginning. He wants to make him the number 2 guy, in charge of all the presidents who are in charge of all the satraps. The king likes Daniel. He doesn't want to do this. But like that genie in the bottle, he's been caught in his own trap. These guys know it, and so they're sly in presenting the case. The law of the Mede-Persian kingdom is permanent, unchangeable, unchallengeable. And in verse 13, they get him. Then they said to the king, Daniel, who is one of the exiles from Judah, pays no attention to you, O king, or to the decree you put in writing. He still prays 3 times a day. Got him. Our law is going to be his doom. And the assumption is that the powers of this world are greater than the law and the power of Daniel's God, which is exactly the temptation all the exiles had, and exactly the temptation that we have. What is stronger? In whom will we trust? In verse 14, the story plays out. When the king heard this, he was greatly distressed. He was determined to rescue Daniel and made every effort until sundown to save him. The all-powerful king, just shown to be a puppet trapped by his own strings. He's powerless to save. He works all day. The king of the whole known universe at that time is powerless to save Daniel. And it begs the question for us. From where does our salvation come? Salvation will not come from government, from the king, period. If your hope, if your joy and your happiness is planted in the hope that the government will promote your values, save you from attacks, rescue you from your peril, you're gravely mistaken. The king, Darius, can do nothing. You see, government is not and will not be the answer to the problems. And perhaps it's a lesson that the church is currently learning. From where does our help come from? It does not come from D.C. or Babylon. Psalm 121 is a great verse for the church to proclaim that our help comes from the Lord, the maker of heaven and earth. In verse 15, then the men went as a group to the king and said to him, remember, O king, that according to the law of the Medes and the Persians, no decree or edict that the king issues can be changed. So the king gave the order, and they brought Daniel, and they threw him into the lion's den. The king said to Daniel, may your God, whom you serve continually, rescue you. The king comes, and they remind the king. It sounds to me like they threaten the king. And Darius gives the order to throw Daniel into the den, which really is a pit. They're throwing him down. And then they're going to cover it up with a stone. It's more a pit than a cave. And the king cries out, may your God, who you serve continually, rescue you, ... because I can't, is the thought behind it. Verse 17. A stone was brought and placed over the mouth of the den, and the king sealed it with his own signet ring and with the rings of his nobles, so that Daniel's situation might not be changed. Then the king returned to his palace and spent the night without eating and without any entertainment being brought to him, and he could not sleep. There's no food, there's no pleasure. You can let your minds wander what the king's entertainment might normally be. It's not happening. There's no joy, there's no sleep, there's no food, there's nothing for the king. There's no peace. And what would the night be like if that was the night of the king? What's that night going to be like for Daniel? The king is restless, the king is peaceless in his sleep. What's the night going to be like for 80-year-old Daniel? There's hungry, savage lions in the pit. They took this 80-year-old saint, tossed him into the pit, sealed the opening. There's no way out. I imagine all these bureaucrats laughing with wicked glee. And they all expected the next morning to find a greasy spot with some bones that used to be Daniel. But God had some other plans. Verse 19. At the first light of dawn, the king got up and hurried to the lion's den. The lion's den. Daniel is facing massive, strong lions. There are lions in life that you and I face. There will not be any single one of you that will ever face a lion in a pit as a punishment. It will not happen. But there are lions in life looking to devour you. The Bible says that all of us have a foe, just like a lion. In 2 Peter 5:8, listen to what he writes. He says, be self-controlled and alert. Why? Because your enemy, the devil, prowls around like a roaring lion looking for someone to devour. Did you know you have a lion chasing after you right now? This morning. And you'll have a lion chasing after you tomorrow, Monday, looking to see whether or not he can take a bite, looking to see whether or not he can rip you apart, looking to see whether or not he can steal your very life from you. He'll use sickness and doubt and fear and loneliness and finances and relationships. And when you're in that pit, when you feel the breath biting behind you, here's the word from the Lord for you this morning. When you're in that pit, remember, there is another lion yet. Verse 20. When he came near to the den, he called out to Daniel in an anguished voice, Daniel, servant of the living God, has your God, whom you serve continually, been able to rescue you from the lions? And Daniel answered, O king, live forever. My God sent his angel, and he shut the mouths of the lions. They have not hurt me, because I was found innocent in his sight, nor have I ever done any wrong before you, O king. The king was overjoyed and gave orders to lift Daniel out of the den. And when Daniel was lifted from the den, no wound was found on him, because he had trusted in his God. Listen to this verse from Revelation chapter 5. Then one of the elders said to me, do not weep. See, the Lion of the tribe of Judah is near. The root of David has triumphed. And on that evening, when Daniel was thrown into the lion's den, there is a new boss of the pride in town. The Lion of the tribe of Judah. And can you just imagine the scene? Here's the new dominant lion in there. And he says to the others, hey, kitty, settle down. Settle down. You don't want to eat old, dear, 80-year-old Daniel. Besides, let me tell you something. You're going to get a feast in the morning. It's a little chilly down here, so why don't you just lay down over there? Because Daniel needs some warmth. Let him cuddle up against you. And another one of you, Your mane is really comfortable. Daniel's going to use it as a pillow. He's got to get some rest tonight. And Jesus, or his angel, depending how you want to look at this, shows up in the lion's den, and all the lions submit. And Daniel the next morning is able to cry out to the king that his God has come. Daniel's night, he's laying down, he pulls out his pocket Old Testament out of his robe, he has a restful evening, and he wakes up to the question of the king. And who had more peace that night? Interesting question. Who had more peace that night? The king who had all the power that he could ever want, or Daniel who had the Lion of Judah at his side? Daniel was in touch with the real king, the King of Kings, the Lord of Lords, who's also called the Prince of Peace. So here's old 80-year-old Daniel resting comfortably, peace in the midst of his pressure, while the king, Darius, stays up all night fighting his own lions. Jesus says in John chapter 16, I have spoken these words to you, so that in me you might have peace. And he goes on, in this world you will have trouble. That's one of the promises of God, maybe that we don't embrace quite as easily. But it's a promise that Jesus makes to you. In this world you will have trouble. You will have all sorts of disappointments. In this world you will have people who betray you. In this world you will have financial trouble. In this world you will have depression and sickness. In this world people will belittle you because you love Jesus. In this world, you will have trouble. But take heart. Be of good cheer, because I've overcome, dominated the world. So Darius hurries to the lion pit early the next morning. He finds Daniel alive and well. There's not a scratch on his body. And Darius condemns the group for conspiracy to commit murder. And they're all eaten up. Verse 24. At the king's command, the men who had falsely accused Daniel were brought in and thrown into the lion's den, along with their wives and children. And before they reached the floor of the den, the lions overpowered them and crushed all their bones. One of the reasons we see this in Scripture is to evidence that it wasn't because the lions were fed that they didn't touch Daniel. It wasn't because they were maimed or weak that they didn't eat Daniel. They were hungry and they were powerful, and we see it. Verse 25, then King Darius wrote to all the peoples, nations, and men of every language throughout the land. May you prosper greatly. I issue a decree that in every part of my kingdom, people must fear and reverence the God of Daniel. For he is the living God, and he endures forever. His kingdom will not be destroyed, and his dominion will never end. He rescues and he saves. He performs signs and wonders in the heavens and on the earth. He has rescued Daniel from the power of the lions. And so Daniel prospered during the reign of Darius and the reign of Cyrus the Persian. That is a phenomenal narrative, a phenomenal story in the Scriptures. But the relevant piece of it for you and I today is just as Jesus tamed these lions 2,600 years ago, he promises that he can tame your lions today as well. And some of you may be thinking, Pastor, you're just kind of stretching a point from some Old Testament narrative that has nothing to do with me, pulling out something, saying that there's lions in my life too. Let me show you another verse. Paul wrote a lot. The very last letter he wrote in this life is 2 Timothy. Chapter 4 is the last chapter of his last letter. And at the end of the last chapter of his last letter, he writes something that's pretty amazing. It's after he's written, the time of my departure is at hand, and I'm now ready to be offered. He knows he's going to die. He's facing execution. In fact, the Romans are going to behead him because he loves Jesus. He writes this in verse 17. He's talking about the time when he was in Ephesus and an evil man named Alexander was just always bumping into him, always trying to take him down, always biting at his heels. He's trying to destroy his ministry. And Paul looks back at this terrible experience, and this is what he writes. But the Lord stood at my side and gave me strength, and I was delivered from the lion's mouth. The Lord will rescue me from every evil attack and will bring me safely to his heavenly kingdom. Why can a man have that kind of confidence? It's because a greater Daniel has come. One in whom, listen to the connections, one in whom no fault was found. One whom his enemies hated and plotted to kill. One whom a leader named Pilate tried to save but was impotent to save. One who went into the pit and died. One who had a stone placed over his tomb. But one who rose from the dead, never to die again, and who dealt a final death blow to Satan, sin, and death. And as the exiles in Babylon found great hope in the story of a God who saves Daniel, so the church in every nation, including our church, finds great hope, great strength in every circumstance. That we take hope that Jesus' resurrection from the dead is the first of many to come. And so we can declare with Paul that God will rescue us from the lions who are looking to devour. You see, for those of us this morning who come with stories of struggle and stories of desperation and stories of disappointment, you need to know the power of sin to enslave has been broken by Jesus. There's forgiveness available for the worst of sinners. The power of death to frighten is demolished. That Jesus has risen from the dead, and he promises for you, his people, his children, that you will safely go home for all of eternity. Jesus' kingdom is coming in all of its fullness. And finally, the power of Satan's authority has been overcome by someone whom the Scripture declares as a stronger man still. His name is King Jesus. And we come off our story in Daniel asking the question that believers have always asked: in whom will you trust? To whom will you offer your worship? To whom will you trust your heart? It's a decision that you and I always have to make. And God, in his great mercy, has made a way of peace, of victory through the death and resurrection of his Son Jesus. And those paths lay before us even this morning. Will it be Darius, the king, and all the powers of the world? Or will our hearts be given by choice, in faith, to Jesus, who tames the lions, not just 2,600 years ago, but today? In whom will we offer trust? In whom will we follow? In whom will we trust our eternal destiny? I pray this morning that God in his mercy would reveal himself to us by his Spirit, that we would choose to offer our hearts, our lives, to the King of Kings. May it be so. Let me pray. Lord, you know all the stories in here this morning. Lord, you know the small things that we struggle with. You know the massive things that are crushing hearts. And Lord, I pray this morning for the unthinkable, for the miraculous, that you would show up in our lion's pit, that we might know your strength, that we might know your grace, that we might know your victory in Jesus, that we may be able to face our lions and walk out without a scratch. And in that, declare your victory and declare your faithfulness, God. I thank you that you are a God in whom we have victory over the worst of enemies. Lord, may your Spirit settle that truth in our heart. May those on whose door you've been knocking, Lord, may they turn to you even this morning. And it's in Jesus' name that we pray. Amen.